Hi, welcome to the Asian Women of Power podcast, second season. In this season, we will bring in something different and unexpected. The stories from our guests will be richer and more colorful. I hope these stories will touch your heart. With me here today is Anne Beaulieu from Canada. Anne is the founder of Walking Inside Resources, Inc. She is an emotional intelligence coach, speaker, and the author of The Emotionally Intelligent Way, a book series that assists us in becoming more emotionally intelligent in all areas of our lives, both personal and business. She serves her clients globally in English, French, and Chinese Mandarin. She also held a bachelor's degree in translation, a master's degree in economics, and she was a chartered financial analyst. Anne's website is www.walkinginside.com. Please help me welcome Anne Beaulieu.
Thank you, Kimchi. That was a wonderful introduction. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You are welcome. It's my pleasure. So, Anne, what was your life like before you moved to China?
My life was when I was a small child, I grew up on farmland. And I remember being 7 or 8 years old. And I had a shovel. And I was digging a hole in the earth. And my brother was about 5 years older than me, came to see me, and he asked me, like, what are you doing? I am digging a hole to China. Because I had heard in school that opposite to Canada, if I were to dig a hole straight down, that I would go to China. And I wanted to go, in my child's mind, I wanted to go to China. So I said to him, one day I will go to China. I will live in China. And he looked at me and like I was this idiot. And he was just like, look around you. It's farmland, it's forest, it's cows and horses. Like how will ever that be possible? Because I grew up in a small town of 3,600 people. But I was determined that one day I would be in China. And that day came when I was 25 years old. That's when I moved to China. I married a Chinese.
So you learned French and English when you grew up in Canada, correct?
I grew up in French, completely French. I have three sisters and two sisters and three brothers with 6 children. My parents, everything was in French. No members of my family speak English to this day. They stumble in English, so everything is in French. TV was in French. Radio was in French. It was a completely white bastion, you could say, little town, like completely white folks. I learned English when I was 18 years old. That's when I started, and I struggled. It was when I landed my first job, where I met after graduating with my master's degree. That's where I met my husband-to-be. I was hired by the province of New Brunswick, which is a bilingual province, like French and English in Canada, to work for the Treasury and Debt Department as a finance economist. And my English was poor. It was limited. And I was expected to deliver in both languages. So I learned really, really fast.
That's very interesting that you had a dream of something inside you that you just connected to China. That's very interesting.
It's in my child's mind. China Maybe it was because of what was promoted outside China for me represented family, a sense of family, a sense of honor, a sense where people took care of each other. And you might ask yourself, like, why would a child living thousands of kilometers away dream of living in China? That was because my reality where I grew up was horrific. It was anything you can ever imagine has happened to me in the past. And for me, China represented safety. And that's why one day I wanted to go live there, because I felt somehow that I would be protected in that country.
Wow. It's an amazing story. That's another book for you to write.
I have written it, actually. I've written a book called For the True Love of the Game. It's a glimpse into my life story. I was asked to, because I've shared it on stage, I've been very open about what I've gone through in the past, because I never want anyone else to ever go through what I've gone through. And so I became open. I became vulnerable. If I could assist one more person or wake up one more person, that's what I wanted to do. So I have already written that book.
Okay.
And it's published on Amazon.
All right. So you met your husband in Canada, right? And you
Correct.
communicate with him in English or in French?
In English. His French was minimal, but he had by that time, he was a student in Canada. He had done a bachelor. He was, he's a Shanghainese, so from Shanghai. And he grew up in China under the communist regime. So he told me he was the kid who had this little red book and he sang revolutionary songs on stage. That was like, he was born in the 60s. So, and he came to Canada after he had a master's degree. He got a scholarship. And in 1989, when Tiananmen Square happened, Canada opens its doors to Chinese students that they could apply for citizenship. So he applied to become a Canadian citizen. So when I met him, he was already well on his way to become, a Canadian citizen. He was already working. He was finishing another master's degree at the same time. So that's so for us, we communicated in English. I was learning English from him, actually.
Oh, really? So when did you move to China?
We were friends for 2 years. And then we started dating. I was dating somebody else at the time. And he thought that everything was going well. So he thought that he would never interfere in that relationship. And when that relationship ended, that's when he came and said that he had feelings for me, always had feelings for me. And if I would entertain those feelings, and I did. And within a year, we were engaged. And within another year, we were married. And that was back in the 1993. And if you remember, in 1992, Deng Xiaoping said, it didn't matter which color the cat was, as long as it could catch mice. So basically, China was opening its doors to foreign investments. And since both he and I were in high finance, he thought that, why don't we move to Hong Kong first? It will be less of a culture shock for you, maybe. And I'm going to go work for an international bank. At the time, our son, our firstborn, was 6 weeks old when I moved to China. I had no friends. I knew no one. I had given up an assistant vice president job. That's how much I loved my husband at the time. I had given up my whole career. I was on a fast track in Canada. And I was like, okay, let's do this. This is my opportunity. Let's move to China. So we moved in 1993. Yeah.
So when you married your husband, did you ever consider the cultural differences between Chinese and Canadian?
I did not. I did not. I was in love. Like, love, the blinders, everything. I was young and naive. And I was just like, it's like I worshiped the ground he walked upon. My family, though, did. My older sister walked up to me and she said, hide your passport. And I was like, what? Hide your passport. He's marrying you for a Canadian citizenship. He doesn't love you. He's marrying you for your passport. And so many people over the years have asked me, did he marry you for your passport? And I would look at these people shocked and just go like, no, he was already a permanent resident when I met him. So their next question became, then why did he marry you? So it was very interesting in that regard. My mother was different. She was more of intrigued as to who he was, and she thought he was polite, he was respectful, he was educated, well-mannered. So there was a bit of everything. And as for his family, they were very happy, even though it created some problems for them because there were not many white people. When I moved to Shanghai and their tiny little flat, I was the only white person in I don't know how many kilometers radius, but among, you could say, 25,000 people, I was the only white. And I had to report, and they had to report weekly to the police bureau as to my activities. It was vastly different. It was because I was white. They wanted to make sure maybe I did not corrupt their mind. I don't know, but it was something that could add aggravation. Think about it. If you have to go report to the police every week, what did she do? What did she say? What did you guys talk about? All that stuff. Like, our whole family was open for scrutiny because their son had married a white.
So what about your husband that made you feel that he's the right partner for you?
At that time, it took me decades to understand this. It's remember when I said to you that I'm so educated. Like, I entered university at 16 years old, and for me, education was a way to get away from my family, to escape. If I could graduate early, goodness gracious, I was free. So it wasn't about building a future. It was like a way to build freedom. And I have over 18 degrees and certification.
Wow.
I only give you 3. The ones that people, and you ask me why is it, people laugh when they find out. They tell me I make them dizzy. And though I was intellectually brilliant, I was emotionally ignorant. So for me, what I looked for back in those days, my mentality, which is less funny, was that if I am smarter than you, then I can overpower you and you will never hurt me. So that was where I went with the education. So when I met him, it wasn't, do I love him? He was the smartest man I had ever met. By the age of 28 years old, he had already 5 university degrees. He was a genius. He was brilliant. He became one of the 3 forefathers who brought China to the high world of finance. He was the head of Hong Kong, China, and Taiwan for Swiss Bank.
Wow.
He was the head of all the derivatives market, and he accomplished that within 5 years of working for the bank. From coming in as a junior, a nobody, to making it to the top. So he was the most brilliant man I had ever met. And if you had asked him the question, he would have said to you, it was the most brilliant woman I had ever met. Looking back, one might ask, what did love have to do with it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think probably you see from each other, you admire the brilliance from each other. And that's why you say, I want to be associated with that person, because he speak your language and you speak his language. It's intellectual intelligence,
Correct.
right? Yeah.
Correct. He was highly rational.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I craved that. At that time, I craved that because
Mm-hmm.
if he was rational, he could rationalize everything. What I did not know is when we would have argument, he would outsmart me because he would rationalize everything.
Mm-hmm.
While I was more emotional. And he wanted emotions. But often what we love in someone or what attracts us in them, later on, it turns out to be something that we dislike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you moved to China, did you experience any discrimination or did you receive a better treatment because you are white?
It was when I moved to China. The main reason was I needed to learn Mandarin. If I wanted to compete in Hong Kong in finance, if I wanted to go back to work, I needed to speak Mandarin. I needed to read and write. And the only way I could do that was by going to university. So I went to Fudan University in Shanghai. So I took my 8-month-old son, gave him to my mother-in-law for safekeeping. And during the week, Monday to Friday, I went to school. And Saturday and Sunday, I went back home for the weekend. Right there, I was breaching many, many rules because China was allowing, for the first time, foreigners to come in and study Mandarin. We were in a compound by ourselves. It was guarded. It wasn't that we could come out and do and visit whatever we wanted to do. There was no such a thing. I had to report to that police bureau every week. When I wanted to go see my son, I needed to ask permission to go see my son because foreigners were not allowed out of the compound because we might corrupt minds or something. It was brand new, so the Chinese government was very, very keen on what we were saying, what we were doing, even the way we were dressing. Our clothes were different. Our haircuts were different. Our hair color was different. And people who had come deep from the mainland back in those days, there was not such a thing as TV or a lot of foreigners. So we were stared at a lot. Leaving the country, if I wanted to go back to Hong Kong, because at the time my husband worked in Hong Kong, so I would go back and forth. I needed permission. I needed a special visa because it was a student visa. So if I left the country, that visa would be annulled. So I would have to reapply every time I wanted to see my husband and if I wanted to see my son. So it was trying to find a way to be able to do that. And the way that I found, which might make some people funny, Marlboro cigarettes and Mont Blanc pen.
You bribe them?
I had to. Because I told my husband, like, what the heck? And he was just like, here are your cigarettes, and here's a Mont Blanc pen. The cigarettes I never understood why. Apparently, the nicotine level in the Chinese cigarette is very low. So, Westerner cigarettes, because I don't smoke, I don't know, they have a higher level of nicotine. So it was very well praised. So I got trained into how many cigarettes to give for what. So if I wanted to pass somewhere, it might be 2 or 3 cigarettes, or it might be 10 cigarettes, or a whole pack. When I got my student visa with an F visa, which was a business visa, that was worth a Mont Blanc pen. And so I learned to navigate all those things.
Wow. Where did you get those things, those supplies?
Oh my goodness. My husband would give them to me because he knew. He grew up on the mainland, so he knew what would work. So there was always a cartoon, like we were allowed to bring certain things as long as we declared them. So it was for, you could say, personal consumption, but it wasn't really. So I could bring them in. So I had to ration, basically, like I had to be sure that I had enough for the term when I brought things.
Wow.
Even alcohol. I remember alcohol, like Blue Label. There was, oh my goodness. It was a world I knew nothing about.
So he got it from Hong Kong, right?
Yeah.
Every time you go to visit him from Hong Kong, you brought back all these things so that you can prepare for the next trip.
Yes, so I could buy my I could buy privileges.
So when you live in China, what did you learn about the people and the culture there, especially about the role of a woman?
It was, the role of a woman was submissive. It was very interesting, actually, because I would observe my parents-in-law. They were both teachers. So my mother-in-law controlled the finances. She controlled the bank accounts. She controlled all the payments, everything. In my relationship with my husband, I controlled the finances. We had a joint account, and I was responsible to make sure that all the bills got paid. So that looks like women have power. Yet at the same, so you're going, no, it was a joke because women had no power. I watched my sister-in-law who had to obey. She was 36 years old when we met. No, 33 years old when we met. And she was not allowed to pierce her ears without her father's approval. She wasn't allowed to date without her father's approval. And it was no different for me. It was all of a sudden, I was thrown in a culture where women, could be seen but not heard, where we were expected to do as we're told. And being rebellious and having seen all that crap growing up, where my father ruled supreme, where my mother controlled the finances, yet at no claim, it was like a whole bunch of victims. I had just exchanged one environment for the other, and it clashed massively, because I was a lot more outspoken as a foreigner.
So how did you express the disagreement? You speak Chinese?
Oh my goodness, it was
with all the emotion.
Because in Mandarin there are words like 我听得懂 is I understand what you are saying. 我明白 is I comprehend. So when my mother would ask me to do something that I disagreed with, I would say to her, 不，我不要, I don't want to. And then she would, get angry because she was the mother-in-law, like what they call the Chinese dragon, She had to be obeyed. And I would turn to the language and I would say, 我听不懂. I don't. And she would say, 你听得懂啊? You understand what I'm saying? And I would say, so I would switch gears. I would say, 那我就不明白了. And I don't comprehend. She would say, 明白是明白的，你就不想做呀. You don't want to do it. And I said, 那你已经知道我不想做. You know I don't want to do. 你为什么问我呀? Why are you asking me to do that? So there would be all this clashing, like using language as a tool. Like, I don't understand what you want. I don't want to do what you want. And then she would do like what many mother-in-laws did in those days. She would go to my husband. And men like him were called the sandwich man because they were caught between their mothers and their wives. And what he would say to her was, did you look at her? She is white. She is not Chinese. And if you keep doing this, it's going to turn really bad. She will leave. Then how will you see your grandchildren? Because at the time we had already two children. And she wanted to see them as much as possible, which was another thing too. The firstborn was a son, so they were ecstatic.
Mm-hmm.
I could not understand what was it about a boy that could be so magical. That was another cultural shock. The kid was healthy. That's all that matters. And they were like, he's a boy. He's going to carry the family name. And then my parents-in-law came and they wanted to choose his name. Because that's tradition as well. That the father-in-law would name the children. And so they didn't even ask me what I thought. They just went to work. But at some point, I got quite, it was like, I want to know. My son had an English name. His name is Alex. But they gave him a Chinese name, which was Han. But they did ask me if I agreed, and I did. And I asked to be explained what Han meant. And it's Han Yu, the Han. The San Dian Shui and the character, and it shows the Han dynasty, and it was to show that my son was a Chinese descendant, and of the Han dynasty, and they wanted for them, since he was a mix, that it would be a grain name. And because at the time our last name was Qian, Fu Qian the Qian, money, so his name was Qian Han. And while we lived in China, he was Qian Han. And so they were super happy with the first boy. He walked on water. Everything was great. My children's first words were not in French. They were not in English. They were in Shanghainese. And he spoke Shanghainese and he spoke Mandarin. When I got pregnant for my second child, you would think they would be thrilled. They were like, why? You already have a son. Why another kid? And that was kind of like, another culture shock.
Yeah.
So when she was born, she became Qianqing. Now, by the time the third child was born, when I told my mother-in-law that I was pregnant with the third child, she was just like, why? Do you have any idea? It costs money, education. You already have two, one of each. Why did you want more? That is not something we might hear in the white culture. So I was just like, so at first when I got pregnant, I was quite sad with the third one. Because it was like almost like that child wouldn't be as welcome. But she did become welcome, because as soon as they saw her, they were deeply in love with her. But it was interesting, all those different perceptions based on gender and rank in the family.
So, so based on your experience in the Asian culture, Asian family, is the father-in-law has the utmost power, and then next is the mother-in-law, and then next would be your husband?
It was very interesting. Technically, what you are saying, yes. But my husband was a country head. He was the head of Hong Kong, China, and Taiwan for an international bank. He made a lot of money. And he was very high rank official, obviously. So therefore, my parents-in-law worshipped the ground that he walked upon.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of, even though my husband was obedient to his parents, there was also the relationship was twisted because he made more money than them and provided them financially. Whoever holds the string purses, you could say, becomes a master of the house. So he was the master of all these houses. Because we own multiple houses. He bought his parents a house. He made sure that they lived comfortably. So therefore, they bent over backwards to please him. And that relationship was, when he wasn't around, it was my mother-in-law, because I talked most to my mother-in-law, because it was women to women, woman to woman. But at the same time, if my father-in-law put his foot down on something, if he became really angry and threw a fit, the women did not dare to go against his wishes. So it was very different. There were a lot of fights for power, like within the family, as to who would lead. But definitely when Xiaoming, because the name of my husband was Xiaoming, when Xiaoming was in town, he ruled.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was like witnessing all of this and navigating those power struggles.
That's interesting. I thought that because your parent-in-law respect or yield to the son, they would not do anything that might hurt your feeling, because they will, they need to be careful, right? Because you are the wife, right? You can tell your husband cut off the supplies and things like that, right?
It did not work like that. A lot of it was unconscious. For example, when my daughter was born, I was doing my CFA at the time, like a CFA, chartered to become a chartered financial analyst. It's an international designation.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult. The passing rate is 20% worldwide per year. It's a 3-year course. And my mother-in-law wanted to help me. And she was like, because I was breastfeeding and my son was less than 2 and I had a newborn baby. So for her, she went to my husband and said, I want to help Anne. I'm going to take Alex and she can keep the baby. That in the Chinese culture, many people expect that the grandparents come in and will do everything in their power to help. But for me, it was like, what do you mean you're going to take my baby from me? It's my son. I'm the mother. I go wherever my son goes. He needs me. I'm his mother. It was vastly different. So a lot of it was unconscious. For example, if I wanted to clean something and I used the wrong rag, I may not notice that there was a rag for the kitchen counter, a rag for the table, a rag for the bathroom, a rag for... So it was all these little things. So instead of my mother-in-law coming to me and talking to me about it, she would go to my husband and talk to him, so he would talk to me in ways that I would understand about how things were done. And a lot of the time, it didn't go well.
Hmm. So share with us your journey in your marriage. How long did it last?
Our marriage lasted 15 years. It was a typical, how do I say this? When we got married, the years we had together as a couple, as a family, 2 years. And then I was on the mainland and he was in Hong Kong and he came to visit.
Mm-hmm.
By the time 5 years into the marriage, I wanted to divorce. But I was in China. I had no money because I had like 3 young children. My youngest was 6 months old. And I was like, I cannot take it anymore. I want to leave. And I remember the nanny, because we had like maids and things like that. And she was a friend. And she because I befriended the maids, which was something you don't do in China. And she was like, "You're a fool. You are so foolish. Everything is joined. If you leave, you never leave a Chinese. You will pay. You better." There was all these things. So in 2002, I waited another year. And we decided, it's going to make you laugh, but we decided that to work on our marriage, it was best if I moved to Canada with the children and he remained in China.
Hmm.
And we would see each other every three months or so. So every 3-4 months, he would come and say, stay 2 or 3 weeks, and then leave, go back to work in China. And for me, then I became one of these Chinese women, basically, with a husband on the mainland while I am in North America. And it was vastly different than the white women here who had a husband, a father coming home at night to their children. That lasted for another 6-7 years. And what we would do is he would say to me, give me 2 years, I'll come back. I'll stay with you with the children. When the 2 years was up, give me 2 more years. I'll come back. I'll stay with you with the children. Give me 2 more years. It came 3 times. 6 years went by. And when that 2 years, you could say the third contract of 2 years was done, because he was an expat, I said to him, are you coming home? And he got offered a job to be the head of ING International. That was big. And I said to him, how much money do you need? Do you think we need? Because I grew up dirt poor. And I was just like, I said, and he gave me a number. And I just shook my head. I was just like, that's crazy. And I said to him, like, are you going to come home? I'm so tired. I'm raising 3 young children under 8 years old. Unbeknownst to me, I was so depressed because I was always alone with 3 kids. But it didn't matter that I had the white picket fence, the beautiful $1 million home. I was alone, utterly alone. When I went to bed at night, so exhausted, because I played mother, I played father, all of it. And the children missed their dad. In 2007, anyway, when he got the job offer, I said to him, are you going to come home? And he said to me that in life, we do what we can, not what we want. And I realized in that moment how low of a priority I was on his list. I was a business asset. I took care of things. And I said to him, if you don't come back, I've been patient, I will file for divorce. He never believed me. Within 4 months, I filed.
I'm sorry. It's yeah, I see that a lot, and I experience it as well in my own marriage. That the as a woman, it seems as a wife, it seems that we are the bottom of the priority list, and sometimes we're not even on the list. It's most of the time would be the career, their parents, the children. Some responsible father would consider the children as their top 3, top 5 priorities. But if the wife is competent, she can take care of herself, most of the time the wife would not be on his priority list to care for, to take care of. And I experienced that the same way, so I understand what you've been through.
Thank you. Thank you. At the time, it took me a lot of digging deep to understand what happened back in those days.
Yeah.
Because after I filed, that saying that you don't divorce a Chinese, you don't leave. It was like my beautiful fairy tale, you could say, in a way, came to a halt. And at the sound of midnight, I went from the princess to the evil witch. All the accounts were closed. There was no access to anything. And the children became a bargaining chip. He wanted the children to move to China to go to school, even though they had been in Canada for quite a few years and they were westernized by then.
Mm-hmm.
Then he wanted the children to do 2 years in China, 2 years in Canada, 2 years in China, 2 years in Canada. And it was ugly. It was an international divorce. It was like 2 wounded titans who went at each other intellectually instead of leading from the heart. And it had devastating consequences on the children. Those were dark days. And because they witnessed how he was treating me, and even though I was saying to him, I'm the mother of your children, please remember this. He was wounded, and it took us 10 years before we talked about what happened in those days. But we went to the bottom of it. And I do want to say that he has become a very good friend.
It took 10 years to get the paperwork done, and
to go to talk about it. Took us a year and a half, like 2 years. Within 2 years, we were officially divorced because
Mm-hmm.
you file and it goes through the courts. But after the divorce, it took 3 years for me to even allow him to set foot on the property because I was so angry. And within 5 years, then we could be cordial, we could be polite, we could attend, because the children asked us, please be civil, let's go to birthday dinners, one day we'll get married. It would be nice to have my father and mother in the same room without them throwing knives at each other. Like, we were that sort of a divorced couple.
Mm-hmm.
And we became quite amicable. And he had met someone, and he had been with her 8 years. And what happened was, she left him. He really loved her, and I really loved her too. And she left him the same way that I had left him.
Is she white or she's Asian?
She was Chinese.
Hmm.
And then he came to me and he asked me, He says, I've made many mistakes in my life. I see that with time, like 10 years had passed. And I see how I could have treated you better. And he says, but she left me the same way that you left me. Therefore, it's me. I'm the common denominator. The problem is with me. And I said to him, I cannot help you with her. It's your relationship with her. But we can certainly talk about what happened during our 15-year marriage. And we did. And it took probably, I don't know, a month. Every day we would talk for 1 to 2 hours, and we made amends. We said sorry to each other for what we had done wrong. We talked about the things, the events that had deeply hurt us and how it had affected our lives. And then one day we both decided that, okay, is there anything else between us that needs resolution? And we were like, nope. Then from this day forward, none of us can ever bring that crap back up. And we became very good friends. I can call him in the middle of the night and he will come, and vice versa. We're here for each other. So it took us a long time to have united front with the children.
Mm-hmm. So is he in Canada now?
Yes, he is. He came back to Canada a few years, like when our son was 16. He decided that when our son would go to university, because he went to university early as well, that he would go. He was accepted in Waterloo University. That he would live in Toronto for a year to help with the transition. And he ended up staying 2 years with Alex, making sure that he was okay. And I was building my business. So things had changed. He was like, you build a business, I will step up. So for all those years that he hadn't stepped up as a father, he was now stepping up. He was present in Alex's life. And when our daughter was accepted in University of Victoria, he moved to Victoria. He bought a house there. And for all her years of schooling, she just graduated in December. This December, so he saw her through. Our youngest got a scholarship. She's now in California in a top school, and he's making sure that for the next 4 years, she has everything that she needs financially. He visits her often. He does all that stuff now. And as this one is well on her way, so now he's looking back to come out of retirement, because he's a trader, financial trader. Some big Royal Bank and all these big banks, they're looking at him like to sit on their board, but for him, the children became a priority.
Mm-hmm. So knowing things that you know now, what would you do things differently?
The one thing that I wish I had known was what we refuse to look at persists. Remember when I said at the beginning of our interview that I looked at education as a way out, a way to escape, to flee my environment. I thought that if I became educated, people would like me more. I thought that if I was smart, people would accept me more. I thought that I would become a somebody. I keep saying I thought a lot, but I felt little. When I said that I was emotionally ignorant, it's true. I was this amazingly intellectually gifted woman, but who was an empty shell inside. Because what I had seen as a child had traumatized me so much that I ejected very early. I did not know that I wasn't feeling. I thought I was feeling. And what that would look like for your audience would be, I might walk on the street and see a homeless shooting drugs, for example. And I would just walk by. Oh, just that. There would be very little empathy for that person. A lot of judgment, very little empathy. So I was emotionally disconnected massively, and I did not know it. That was because I refused to look at my past. I thought that if I reinvented myself, I was home free. Now I know I am the common denominator with every experience in my life. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And if I want to create good, I must be aware of where I have been so I can change the programming that does not work for me.
May I ask, what did you see when you were young?
So I'm going to do, I see the goosebumps come right away. So I'm going to do a caveat here to your audience that what I might say will shock them and they might not want to listen. So I will give you a brief summary. My mother was psychotic, clinically psychotic. Psychosis is a disease of the mind. It's an obsession on two things. It's either on a person or religion. My mother, psychosis was on religion. She was, my whole childhood, she was pregnant with the child of Jesus Christ, fathered by the Holy Spirit. Imagine being a child and your mother has these ghost pregnancies. And you think you're competing with your siblings and with your father and mother's attention. I was competing with God himself. And I was competing with ghost children. A moment when she would have her episodes, she would get locked up in a mental hospital. She'd be there one morning. And imagine you're 5 years old, you get up in the morning, your mother is gone. Gone. You don't know when you're going to see her next. You just don't know. And that went on throughout my whole childhood. And I've seen many of these episodes where people came in and what you see in the movies where they pin her down, literally grown-ups pinning her down physically so they could give her a sedative because she completely went nuts and take her away. So that was one thing. Her husband, my father, was a sociopath. And I used to think that my father had a heart of stone. He was one of the hardest men I had ever seen. If you said no to that man, I remember at 7 years old saying no to my baby brother, who was his favorite. My father was so angry that I had made his favorite cry. I was 7 years old. And he came to me calling me all kinds of names. And he raised a pine chair, a chair that's solid wood. And he lifted across above his head to smash it onto my back. And looking at this man, all I could think was, one, am I going to die? And two, if I die, please make it quick. Or how many bones are going to break? And is it going to hurt? That's one thing. My father, one day, had a brilliant idea to sit in his garage and he took a winter tire. Have you ever seen a winter tire? Maybe you've had some on your cars.
I don't know what it is.
A winter tire of a car? You know,
Okay.
a tire?
Okay.
Okay.
A car tire, right?
Yes, but
Yeah,
a winter tire, they're thicker and they have
Okay.
more threads.
Okay.
They're deeper threads so they can grip on the snow better.
Mm-hmm.
My father sat in his garage and carved a whip in the winter tire so that he could break the will of his children. So if you've ever seen the movie Roots, I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, is I tell people I don't have to see that movie. I know the sound of a whip and I know the feel of a whip on the body when the flesh gets swollen. You think that's bad? I was sexually abused by my father, my mother's father. I was gang molested by a group of 15-year-old teenagers. There were 6 of them. I was 6 years old. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So do you understand why in my world, why I have 18 degrees and certification? It took me to meet my mentor, Dov Baron, before I started making sense of all this. That I realized that I was thinking instead of feeling. That my smartness was a survival mechanism instead of something genuine. It was like, I'm going to become smart. It was a skill. I'm going to hone that to protect myself. And how I had lived my whole life externally focused on others. So basically looking at the world like, are they going to hurt me? Because to me, the world was a bad place, instead of being loving and compassionate. Compassion, feeling, loving, kindness, empathy were qualities that I knew very little of. Very, very little. I had to learn how to feel, if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, it does make sense. I understand that part. I think most of us we use the intellect to cover the emotional part, because we think that if you show your emotion, you are weak, and that perception is still exists to today. So that's why you seldom see men cry, right? And particularly Asian men cry. So thank you for sharing that. It must be very painful moments.
It used to be. I used to be the wound. Instead of meaning that when I would talk about it, I would collapse and cry and feel full victim. And now everything that has ever happened to me, and I have been very public about it, because I realized that my vulnerability was my strength. That if I became vulnerable, I could inspire people to stop doing that shit and stuff that's hurting us, and that we could all inspire one another to do different. I became fueled like this crystal. It's like I took my anger and I turned it into this crystal fuel. And in my openness, I built a phenomenal business. I would share posts. I was just beginning. I was a nobody. And people were coming in, like 5 requests on Facebook a day, 10, 15, 25, 100. And I would tell my mentor, why? Why are people following me? Why do they want to befriend me? Don't they see I'm hurt? Don't they see I'm screwed up? Don't they see? And he was like, no, you are real. They can relate to you. And people were sharing their story. And you know what was really sad was that my story, has maybe horrific as it was the story of millions and billions of people on this planet. And when I understood that, I became a writer. I wrote like 25 books in the Emotionally Intelligent Way series to assist people. I developed my coaching business. I have platforms where I share my articles. There's 1 million views a month. It's because people understand, because I now understand the power that we have to change our life. We get to choose. We can remain a victim. We can hide. Like you said, Asian men don't cry. My ex-husband used to be like that, but I have seen him cry. And in him crying, it brought everyone closer. And even he understood the power of vulnerability. It's what sets us free. In our vulnerability, we feel our truth. We feel our purpose. We need to feel in order to know what we're here for.
Mm-hmm. So, what is a healthy relationship? How can someone tell if they don't have a healthy relationship?
A healthy relationship. Well, first of all, people think that a relationship is with others. It's not. We have one relationship. One. Only one. It's the relationship that we have with ourselves. That relationship is the vessel that we use with others. And our relationship with every single person is a different depth in that vessel. And that's determined by emotional boundaries. So if you think, for example, that you can treat others better than you treat yourself, that's what I used to think, I am here to say bullshit. What we do is what we do everywhere. Everywhere. And when I understood that, a healthy relationship is an aware relationship. Awareness of self. When we are aware of our feelings and emotions, where they come from, who they remind us of, the past and things, then we use this awareness to develop a relationship with ourselves. And from this awareness that we have with ourselves, we get to develop a relationship and awareness of others. So every healthy relationship stems from our level of awareness. The more aware we are of who we are and what we do and why we do it, the healthier our relationship will be with others. So there is zero blaming, zero shaming, zero finger pointing, zero guilt tripping. We are 100% responsible for each result in our relationships.
I like your answer.
I am an emotional intelligence coach.
Yeah. I've learned about that too, but I don't call it emotional intelligence. I'm kind of sensing it. Yeah, it says about, you cannot love anybody if you don't love yourself, right?
Correct.
So, yeah. So, how do you develop an emotional intelligence? Who needs it?
We all need it. We have skin and bones, so we all need it. IQ, I have this quote, IQ may get you a foot in the door,
Mm-hmm.
You can land a job with your IQ, but it is EQ, your emotional intelligence, that will determine whether you're invited to stay. It is true.
Mm.
We may open our door to people, but when if you see they're morons and they do things that we don't like, we might ask them like, it's time to go now. So how do we become emotionally intelligent? Like I said, it's awareness. So it's reuniting with the wounds within.
Mm-hmm.
It's what we call the wounded child. It's what happens in our childhood that hurt us. So for me, it was feeling, I had to feel everything that had happened to me as a child. When I did that, for a whole year, I cried solid. If you had met me, I looked like I had stage 4 cancer. I had lost 25 pounds on this frame, and I just kept crying. Like all my sorrow was coming out. But under all that sorrow, there was anger, there was sadness, there was resentment. It had to be processed. Like, because it's inside of us. And if it stays there, then it's like pus, it festers. The wound needs to be cleaned. It needs to be, and that's the awareness. As I became more aware, I started developing empathy and compassion. Instead of resenting my father, I asked myself, what happened to this man to become the way he is? When he was born, did he decide at 2 years old, I'm going to be the man with the heart? No. My mother, was she born thinking, wow, when I am 30 years old, I'm going to go completely nuts? No.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened to them? And as I went digging into their past to understand myself, I realized that my father was born right before the Second World War, that there were 10 children in his family, that his father died when he was 7 years old. He only has a grade 4 education. He was sent to work very early to feed his family at 9 years old. Can you imagine? He went to work in a logging place. Can you imagine? 9-year-old kid logging woods in 1940, 45. It's crazy. Is it any wonder? Like, and my mother grew up in a family of 20 children.
Wow.
She was number 4. And she saw a lot of horrific things. Her best friend had been raped by her father, gotten pregnant, and she died during delivery. And nobody believed my mother when she would tell that story. And every episode, she would bring her friend back up. Until one day, even I went like, oh my goodness, this is a true story. This was this woman who wanted the world to know what had truly happened to her friend. Because back in those days, they used to, in the 30s, 40s, they would hide that shame. They would hide the women. They would hide all these dirty family secrets would be hidden away. So when I started understanding these things, and as I was developing compassion for myself, I became curious, genuinely curious. What happened to them? What makes them do what they do? And I got to understand why I did what I did. It's how, the cycle of abuse gets perpetuated. So as I became more aware, then that's when things started changing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. So, what came to your mind when you heard your mentor, Dove Barron, ask you the question, who are you hurting by playing small?
Oh my goodness. Back in those days, I was completely disconnected. But there was something in the way he said it. It just gripped me. And I went home that night and I started crying, and I was just like, for days and weeks, there was something awakening within me. I did not know what it was. But I needed mentoring. And so I started asking around, who would mentor me? Who could help me? And and because I was afraid of going to him directly because I had heard that his bullshit meter was off the chart. And I was full of crap, so I was just like, oh my goodness. And lo and behold, he was offering a speaking program about you could become a speaker training, an authentic speaker training, speaker from the heart. And I was like, I'm gonna apply. And I started mentoring with him. And during our first boot camp, he had asked each of us to share an event that had deeply hurt us as a kid. And I went inside my head and I thought, what am I going to say? Which one? Oh my goodness. What are they going to say? Like, it was all, what are they going to say? What are they going to say? So I shared my event. I chose the one with the chair because it seemed better than many other options. And people were looking at me shocked. And I became very wounded. And I was just like, there it is. You know, I share something and they're looking at me. And I wasn't realizing I was rejecting myself at the time. I was projecting onto others what I thought. With time, I realized the level of shock was not because of the story. It was because of my lack of feeling. I had zero or little compassion for that child who went through that. It was like I was telling that story like reading a menu at a restaurant. I'm going to have the chicken today. And Dov, in that moment, he walked up to me. And his eyes were so blue, like the bluest I had ever seen. I saw pain in his eyes, and I saw something that I was unfamiliar with. It was compassion. And he came at me, and he knew that in order to make a crack in this thick skull of mine, in that thick armor, that he would have to have me spinning emotionally. I had to lose all the right answers because I was very quick with right answers. I was intellectual.
Mm-hmm.
I loved being right.
Mm-hmm.
And he think a bit of FBI deprogramming. It took about 2.5 days of him nonstop talking about my marriage, talking about my children, talking about me micromanaging my children, my impact on my children, my impact on my marriage. And I just went spinning. And it became like, I had no idea what was earth, what was heaven, what was ground. Like I became so confused because all the right answers were leaving. And he would keep asking questions. So I'm like spinning. And at one point, I just went, I said, whatever is going on, I'm just going to let go. Just one moment. Just surrender. One moment. And in that moment, that's when the light, you could say there's a crack in the head and the light, for the light to come out. And I thought, whatever's going on, I'll be okay. That was just the beginning. Because all my rage came out. Everything that I had not felt came out. People that I thought were my friends walked away. People who I thought were not my friends stayed. There was so much. And the whole time, he walked by my side. He's been my mentor for 5 years. I see him weekly. And it's phenomenal. Like phenomenal what that playing small to this day still applies. Last 2 weeks ago, I asked him, I want to hire him for a 2-year contract, weekly, 2 years. And I said to him, I went from a nobody to an international business. I am taking it global, and I want you to help me lead the way. And he was like, okay. And I just, because playing small is never what we came here to do. We came here to make a difference, a positive difference in people's life. Each of us. We each came here with a purpose. I am fully convinced of this. And playing small serves no one but our ego.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's really, I think it's a privilege to find a mentor, right? That you are looking up to, that can guide you to the place where you want to go. It's the mentor that you will be authentic with. You will be, be open completely. It's a wonderful, and it's a great experience to find that person.
There are
Congratulations.
many. Thank you. There are many people. They say when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Yeah.
Is an old saying.
Mm-hmm.
And he modeled for me what was being a great coach, a great mentor, what it's like. And I do the same for my clients. With my clients, one thing that Dove gave me right from the start was undivided attention. I had never had undivided attention. And all of a sudden, I had someone who could mirror back compassion. No matter what I said, I received compassion in return. And it allowed me the safety to feel safe, to look at all the past and everything and change. And it was like redoing the puzzle. And so safety is something that I also provide with my clients. And trust is a huge one. I remember back in the early days, I mean, Dove is international, like he's one of the top 100 speakers to hear in your lifetime. And I remember back in the days, we're at the beginning, probably second sessions, he asked me, how much do you trust me? On a scale of like, on a scale like, like 0 to 100. And I was just like, holy crap, not that much. So I thought that I would be, as I couldn't bullshit him. So I was just like, okay. So I said 10%. 10%. Think about, I don't know, you tell Oprah 10%. And I thought, oh my goodness, he's going to tell me to get out of his office, to leave. And you know what he did? I never forgot. He looked at me and he put both of his hands together and he says, for that 10%, I know how hard it's been for you. So I'm deeply honored for this 10%. I was just like, wow. It was coming from a place of honoring. And it taught me a lot about coaching, how to give undivided attention, and how to build faith and trust in my clients and for them and themselves.
So I noticed that your website has both English and Mandarin Chinese. Who are your primary clients, men or women, Canadian or Chinese Canadian?
Women, Chinese and white. The Chinese women, they are what I call, they're the first generation of born and raised in North America. Their parents have been raised on the mainland. So these children are very much bananas. They're yellow on the outside and they're white on the inside. And so they have Western values. They grew up with, Adventure Time and Reddit, and they're very educated, very aware of what's happening in the world. But they have Chinese parents who grew up on the mainland and or wherever else in Asia, like they're Asian. And there's a cultural clash, what I call the heritage clash. They want to respect their elders, but they find it very difficult because of they don't have the same value. So when they come to see me, it's often they're at the end of their rope with their mothers, or they're seeing their fathers do behaviors that, hurts them, like fathers having mistresses, what we call the 小老婆, and they realize like things into their parents' relationship that's highly dysfunctional. Then they wonder, how am I perpetuating that? I grew up with that. And so that's when they come to see me. They want to make peace and develop a healthy relationship with their parents. And they realize that their relationship with themselves is unhealthy because they lack emotional boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the Chinese women. The white women are mainly women in business. They're women in business, small to mid-size, and mid-size up to $25 million in sales, who want to build thriving sales department, but they want to build genuine relationships. Because in this digital age, what will allow anyone to come to the sale? Not once, that's IQ, but multiple times, that's EQ, requires building genuine relationship. It requires emotional intelligence. So when they come to see me, is they want to incorporate emotional intelligence through every aspect of their business.
Mm-hmm. So how do you want others to get in touch with you?
People can contact me on my website. It's walkinginside.com. There's a contact form there that they can use. I am on LinkedIn. I am on Facebook. You can email me at Anne, A-N-N-E, at walkinginside.com. And if you go on my website, there's a wheel that you can spin, and that will allow a free book. Someone can win a free book, and it will be downloaded in their mailbox. So.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you for your gifts. And thank you so much for being on the Asian Women of Power podcast. I know that your story and your journey will touch the heart of the Asian community. I hope that they learn some valuable lessons here. Best of luck on your next journey, Anne. And thank you.
So much. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been a pleasure, Kimchi.
Goodbye now.
Bye.